Welcome to Conversations With. My name is Shaley Hugendorn, and I live with bipolar 2 disorder. Sharing with others is healing, both individually and collectively. Sharing our stories will educate others, bring more understanding, shed more light, and smash more stigma. Our voices need to be heard. Our stories aren't over yet. This is Bipolar. Hi everyone, welcome back to This is Bipolar. I am Shaley Hugendorn. I am a mom, I'm a wife, I live with bipolar 2 disorder. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the host of this podcast. Before we get started on our super amazing, interesting, going to be hard to talk about topic today, I just wanted to remind everybody I have subscriptions on Instagram. What that means is when you subscribe, it's $6.99 US a month, and then you will get almost like a whole extra feed of extra content, and every podcast that I do an extra exclusive bit for the subscribers. So no one else has heard that before, and they are amazing. And we pick topics that people would be really interested in. And also there's other content there. And I have a social channel, which means we can talk back and forth. It's kind of like our thread. So I'm able to answer questions much more quickly than on regular Instagram messages. And so I would be forever grateful if you joined and supported me and my work here. I would be, yes. And another question people have is, do I have to go on the social channel, or do I have to be visible there and, completely plug into the community? Absolutely not. If you want to hang out in the background, if you just want to consume the content and you're not comfortable doing all the interacting, just come. And if you want to just support me and never, ever look at anything, I would appreciate that too. So I would love, love, love my guest, my reoccurring guest and friend, Brandon. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Brandon. I go by B Russ. I'm a content creator, a bipolar advocate, a musician, pretty multidimensional at this point. But at the end of the day, I struggle with bipolar too as well. And so very much looking forward to this conversation. I love being able to sit down and talk because I just feel like, we both have been through some similar things, and I feel like we have a good perspective on it, but also being able to just look back and laugh sometimes, when it's
Yeah.
to so yeah, that's me. But I was gonna say, like, it sounds like the subscription sounds like pretty cool. Like
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited to do it. Because I'm here on my own. I used to have a co-host, but because I'm on my own and doing all the things, it would be really helpful to be able
yeah,
to
yeah,
financially support
yeah,
the podcast. So yeah,
yeah,
and it's really like I am loving it. We're a small group so far, but we can just connect, and then sometimes I get back to every message, but sometimes it takes me a while, especially if someone
mhm,
asks me like an in-depth question. It takes me a while
yeah,
to get back, but this is a space where we have this little messaging, which is my favorite part, where someone just like, hey, can you send me a message, like some support, like
right,
tell me I can do this, like reach out when we're feeling insecure and stuff. So,
yeah.
and
That's
we
so
have had people write in there like, send out good vibes. I'm in a meeting. I feel an anxiety attack coming on, and really cool stuff like, or I'm hiding in the bathroom, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
it just feels a little bit like a lifeline even for me. And so,
yeah,
yeah. And then I hop on there and it can be really candid
yeah.
and
That's
stuff.
so
So yeah, yeah,
yeah. People need it. People need it for sure.
for
Like
sure. For
yeah.
sure. It's like a mini support group in your pocket. So
Yep, yep,
that's awesome.
yep.
Well, I would love today, we are going to be talking about bipolar and all things work and workplace and all the complications and hard things and ideas of how to make it better for those of us living with bipolar. So I thought we'd start off a little light. Brandon and I were saying before, like we can joke about a lot of things now, even though, some of them are small t and big T traumatic things that happen. So if we seem like we're light or cavalier, because it's all you can do sometimes, right? It's all like you just to keep trucking, you have to be able to laugh at some
Yeah,
of the things.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I would love to hear. I want to go back to teenage, probably, Brandon. And what was your very first job?
Man, you know what? I'm laughing so hard. So I honestly didn't work until my freshman year of college. Um, my very first job was McDonald's, actually.
There you go. My husband too. So many people.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. And so it was one of those things, my mom was a health inspector, and so she knew the manager who worked there. So, she got me in for an interview. I came in and pretty much, they put me on the first window. So where, I had to take the money and count out the change and
Oh,
stuff like that. And man, it was a whole nother world at McDonald's. I had a
yeah.
feeling because just as a customer, you kind of see certain things, but working there, it was I'm not gonna say it was a terrible experience, but I was so young. Like I had just turned 18, so I was very, immature, very just, again, this was my first job. So,
Yeah.
I showed up and did what I was supposed to do, but did I like it? I did not like it at all. Like it was the and it was more just from a standpoint of not feeling like connected to the work, I think. It was very
Yeah.
just, I'm here just to, hand out this money and hand out this change and be nice to people and smile. But it was like such a mixture of different types of people coming up to that window, from people being rude, from people being nice. It just was and then my coworkers, like that was a crazy experience too. It was just, it was a, it was a very interesting time.
That is interesting. Okay, so I know I don't know how much younger you are than me, but I know you're younger than me. Did you have to do where you had to count back the change? Like where you'd be like, $1, up to 50 if
I
it was
see what
like
you're saying.
46, or did it just tell you the change and you could just give it to them?
It pretty much told us to change, like, on the little computer screen, but
Yeah.
I always
Oh,
anytime I work, like, on a cash register, like, even though it tells me, like, I pretty much am doing it, like,
yeah.
in my head, so I wouldn't necessarily count it back to them, but I kinda would know, like, what it is, and when I would hand it to them, I'll just, tell them, like, what it is, but,
Oh my
yeah, the
gosh. So
computer made it a little
I had to count back, and then it's like
Okay,
the moment I had to do that, I was so anxious that I would like forget numbers. I'd be like 11.7 cents. Like I
yeah,
just but I figured it out, but I remember every time, and it was interesting. My first job, I didn't want to work fast food. But my first job, I wanted to do a clothing store. I loved
okay,
clothing.
yeah.
But can I tell you this? So my first job was at Bootlegger. I don't know if they have them in the States. Probably. It basically
I
sells
don't know.
jeans and clothes. Like it's
Okay, okay,
like H&M, like those kind of things.
okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And yeah, so I did a lot of folding of jeans. But one of the things that I knew I'd get hired because a lot of times when I apply for jobs, I was up and I knew like I can talk. I'm not super socially anxious. I don't get super socially anxious. I have a
Mhm.
little bit more now that it's been COVID, but I knew I'd get it because I knew I'm good talker. Like I know
Yeah,
I can act like when you're confident, when you're hypomanic, right?
right, right.
So, but secret be told, not a secret anymore. I applied for it. I, not due to my own actions, but I almost got caught with a friend that I didn't know was shoplifting there. Had,
Oh, wow.
yeah, had stuck something. She wasn't a good friend. Stuck something in my bag. I don't know if it was like socks or scrunchie or was something small. And so I kept thinking in the interview that they were going to know this, or because I don't have an inner monologue that I was going to blurt it out. But
Yeah,
I'm happy to say that I got the job, and
okay.
I loved parts of it, mostly the discount.
Mm.
But I was 16, okay? And this is what they did. They're so smart. So they did this thing where you could buy clothes, but you could charge it towards your next check, right? So then they would take it off. So
Oh,
we're like, don't know how to manage money. We
yeah.
love the clothes. I would get checks for like $2, even though I
I was
worked.
about to say the same thing. I would have no paycheck at all. I would have like a bunch of clothes, but I would have no.
Yeah, same. No money, fabulous jeans, right? And I
Yeah,
was like, how, like looking back, I'm like, how could you do that to teenagers? Luckily, it was extra money, right? Like I was only 16. I didn't need it for my basic necessities kind of thing. But
yeah.
yeah, I remember my parents would be like, oh, maybe you could put some in savings. And I'm like, these jeans here, you're looking at the savings.
Yeah, this is the
So
savings.
bad. But I do remember being really anxious because even though you didn't get paid by commission, it was
Mhm.
super high pressure. They always made it seem like, so we were always afraid of these so-called personal shoppers. So they would
Oh,
always tell you like be so careful. So you'd have to, I remember it to this day, like you'd have to make sure that you said hello within a minute. If they got in
mhm,
the change room, you'd always have to ask them if they wanted like a belt or something like you're trying to upsell. And you have
mhm.
to go back within 30 seconds or a minute and a half to go back and ask again. And you can tell you're trying not to annoy people, but also you don't want to get called out by this shopper that sends in this report. And so
Yeah.
taking things much more seriously than everybody else and having anxiety. I like had nightmares about this shopping thing. And then they like pitted us against each other by accident because they had this big chart and you would end up being like a red star, a silver star, or a gold star, depending on how much you sold or whatever. But
Right.
you don't get moved up to the till later. So you have to hope that the till person puts in your number, and people were always stealing people's sales. And I would never say anything because I didn't want to cause waves. And so,
Right.
yeah, so fun, yes, but also like
Mhm.
really, really stressful.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
relate to that so much because my first job, like my first full-time job, I would say, like after college was selling used cars and I hated it. I hated
Oh,
sales because it was literally like what you were just describing as far as like not finding this balance of like not wanting to like annoy people, but then it's like I also have this like extreme sensitivity to being rejected. And so it's like if someone even gave me a vibe like they weren't interested, like I wouldn't want to talk to them. Or if I would and they made it clear they're not interested, everything else on the script went out the window because I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna leave them alone because I don't want them to treat me however. And so
yeah.
yeah, I get that. I get that a lot. I
Yeah,
relate.
and especially, and we'll jump into this in a minute, but especially depending where I was, I don't think I wasn't having full blown symptoms, and it's hard to look back as a teenager, but definitely had the
Yeah,
depressions and the highs or
yeah,
whatever. But if I looked back, I bet you I could see a pattern of when I was hypomanic, the amount of sales, because I'm so like super fun girl to compared to like dreading to even talk to them
mhm,
when when I was depressed. Yeah.
yeah. I get
Yeah.
that.
Which brings us to how so let's talk about what it looked like in our jobs like pre-diagnosis, because when, remind me, I think it was in university you were
It was
diagnosed, right?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with bipolar in 2017, but my freshman year of college is when I was diagnosed with initially anxiety, and then about some months or kind of like maybe closer to a year into college, while I was working at McDonald's, like I would just have like these crying spells. Like I would be at work on the register, just like, and that's when I was like, yeah, like something's not right. But so this was like 2006 pretty much. So even from then up until I actually received a diagnosis, I was just thinking it was just the depression and anxiety, but that affected my work for years, even before the diagnosis. But then when I got the diagnosis, it kind of made everything that I struggled with up until that point make a ton more sense.
Yeah.
And not just for me, but for other people as well, because my family's looking at me like, why do you always keep reaching like this point? Or why do you get so like aggressive towards your super like the disrespect I would receive at work, depending on what space I was in, like it would make me like very like angry and like combative and things. But Yeah, so that's kind of I guess when all of that started.
Yeah, yeah. Well, see, if you want to hear more about Brandon's in-depth diagnosis story and such, I interviewed him, I think maybe a year ago. You can look back in the
It
podcast
was
or
yeah, a year ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you can hear all about his, the progression from all the way through his diagnosis, and it was such a good interview. Yeah. So if you
Yeah.
want to hear more, which you will, go back and listen to that.
What about yourself?
So yeah, so I didn't get diagnosed till I was like 32.
Gotcha.
So I had a lot of jobs. So
Mm.
a lot of them were like in retail, but one experience, my worst experience is so I decided so my boyfriend and I broke up and I decided a friend was going to school in a town about 5 hours away. And it was my first time like I'm going to move out, right? And
Okay.
maybe first time. I don't know. Anyways, I was moving away from the city I lived in. And so we
Mm.
went, and then I was going in hopes of getting a job and eventually going to school there. But she already had a job. Well, literally a week in, I hit a deep depression.
Oh,
And I was told there were all these kinds of jobs. But what I didn't know is that most of the people I was talking to went there in the summer because it's kind
mm,
of like a place everybody goes in the summer, right?
okay.
And then everything slows down. And so then they're not hiring, right? They have their full-time people. So
Yeah.
I was like hitting the streets. We didn't apply online back then,
Yeah.
handing out resumes, and it was rejection after
Okay.
rejection. I was, extremely homesick.
Mm.
My friend had like every day she would go to school. She was becoming like a massage therapist or something. So it wasn't just a class here and there. She was there like 8 to 4 kind of thing. And I was so lonely and I'm all alone with like these thoughts. And
Yeah.
in this small apartment, I know nobody, and I'm
Mhm.
just getting rejection after rejection. And I remember just sitting on the couch and having my drink on a side table, which was like a cardboard box with a blanket on it. And I remember just watching Law and Order all day. I found a channel that had
Mhm.
Law and Order, and I remember I would wake up and I just would close my eyes quickly because I was like, I don't know if you have that feeling when you're depressed, but it's like I just want to go back to sleep because it would
Yeah.
rush in, right? It
Yeah.
rushes in. And so
Yeah.
I ended up getting a job at a coffee shop with a very mean, um, non-nurturing or kind boss. I mean, she was
Mm.
just one of those people that says it as it is, but she wasn't warm.
Yeah.
And I don't I don't like making people's food. I just don't like it. It would stress me out. It would have to be like certain order, probably like
Yeah.
McDonald's, like a
Okay.
tomato, then this. It just stressed me out.
Yeah.
Anyways, I had this job and it wasn't busy. And
Mm.
so you can only find so many tables to wipe or whatever. So then
Right.
you're alone with your thoughts, which I
Yeah.
needed a distraction, right?
Yeah.
So then fast forward a little bit, and there's this one night that there hadn't been a customer in 2 hours, right? And we
Um,
didn't have phones back then. Like there was nothing to look at. There
yeah,
was,
it's just like
right?
literally just staring at the wall pretty much.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then when I get depressed, I get, binge eating disorder,
Mm.
back then before my
Yeah.
diagnosis, and
Okay.
so because we were allowed to and it was day olds, I would, like, just eat muffin after I felt sick.
Yeah.
So I cleaned up early, like a half an hour early. I started mopping, I started doing everything, and I locked the door 10 minutes early, and my boss came to deliver the milk for the next day.
Uh,
Yeah.
okay.
So I was totally busted, which I didn't
Yeah.
think would be a big deal, but then called me the next morning and let me go. So I've been like trying to get a job, finally got this measly job that had 10 to 12 hours or whatever. And
Mm.
then I lost it. And I was like, I'm a high achiever, firstborn. Do you know what I mean? Like I overfunction when
Yeah.
there's crisis, to the point of detriment, and
Mm.
like to fail and move there and like my first time and fail while my roommate and friend was like flourishing,
Yeah.
right? And I
Yeah.
remember I didn't know what to tell people, and then I would just tell people like, oh, they were downsizing. Like I couldn't bring it to myself to
Yeah.
to tell anyone or tell my parents, even though I have like my parents would be fine. And I
Yeah.
ended up moving back, and it actually wrecked that friendship too because like, even though I gave lots of notice and paid ahead and, did all those things, I essentially, like, she felt like I abandoned her. She was
I see what you're saying.
gonna have to
Yeah,
figure it out. Yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say that kind of like brings up a good point, like in the context of this, as far as like work and relationships. I feel like sometimes, and I'm sure you can relate to this based on the story you just told, but I was gonna say how sometimes when we are depressed or when we're not feeling well at work, at that point, it really the concern about the company for me cuts off. Like I'm like, I don't care what y'all think because at the end of the day, I need to take care of me. And I've done certain things too where it's like very questionable from the company. Like you do know this is a business. Like you can't just cut off your phone or but I used to be a dispatcher for an agency here in Atlanta and we would get calls from law enforcement for diversions, like people that they would arrest for having some mental health challenges or quality of life offenses. So like stealing food, different things like that. And I remember one morning waking up and I was just like, and this is working from home at that, but I was just like, I literally don't have it today. So instead of me maybe communicating with my supervisor, because it's like 7 in the morning too, I just stopped answering the phone. And so then I get a text from the director, like, have they been trying to call you? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. They
Yeah.
or may not have been trying to call me. And they were pretty much just like, yeah, like you can't do that. And at that point, I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna take the day off because I didn't care. I just felt like I need to take care of me. And so I really can relate. Like I didn't shut the door necessarily, but I feel like kind of turning off the phone was like an equivalent thing to that because we just, we're in my opinion, we're just focusing on ourselves in that moment because we're
Yeah.
literally just trying to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I almost did like, and it's not better or worse, but I almost did the opposite where I would make things worse for myself because I wouldn't take the time, right?
Yeah.
Or I wouldn't. I stigmatized myself so badly and thought it was a personality flaw and not an
Yeah.
illness. I just thought
Mhm.
everyone else can do it, or there's something. And I would get when I got actually both, but in different ways. When I was depressed, my brain would tell me stories. So it would tell me stories, start telling me that people didn't like me, or they
Mhm.
thought I was bad in their job, or they were, talking about me, or maybe giving information. Um, and sometimes it would be true because there were a lot of teenagers at these jobs. I worked at this one job which was really fun, where it was like a CD store. For y'all that don't know, we used to have these CDs that have
Mhm.
music on them.
They were a thing at one time, an actual disc.
And, and so I got to have this cool job where I was behind this listening bar. So I would give like Jones soda, which was like a cool soda back then, and make lattes and coffee, and people could sit there and test out the CD. Like,
Oh,
yeah.
sounds so cool.
Yeah, it was really cool, right? And then the cool thing that I love doing is I got to put the CDs back. You put them back and I got to put this like totally random foil on them, like the clear, and then I got to use this blow dryer that, like, it was such a, like, almost like a stim. Like, it was my favorite thing to do, not talk to people and do that.
Yeah,
When I was depressed, I would way rather do that than like
yeah,
menial tasks. So
right.
I think one of the things that my bipolar came in and really showed up in some of my jobs, besides the complete mood change, would be the tasks that I enjoyed. So I think it would be confusing for my boss or my coworkers that I would be like gregarious and just all about the customers, and then like withdrawn in the corner using this like shrink wrap blow dryer the whole time, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so I think that that gets really confusing, which then feeds into the paranoia, right?
yeah.
That
Mhm.
that nobody likes me, and then I would go from being sad about that, then all of a sudden I'm like defensive and
Yeah,
bitter, right?
yeah,
And a few times I know I've like made out this big story about how unfair a boss is being, and I've been like snippy.
yeah. Man, I can relate to that so much because there have been times where I've made decisions and different jobs based on, maybe not the best decisions, but what felt like the best. But it was really a self-preservation type of thing. But I would feel as if it was equivalent to like if they would have sent out an email blast to the whole company, like Brandon just did this because I just felt like so naked, like, where
Yes.
it's like, can they tell? Like, can they tell
Yeah.
them the feeling this way, or and it's a lot of pressure. And this
Yeah.
snippy part, like, man, I have so many stories about being snippy with bosses, but it's confusing because, and this is the confusing part about bipolar, probably any, disorder that's similar when it relates to our mood is like, there's a lot of times where I feel like my boss 100% deserved, what I was saying to them. But I think just my mood state at the time, just like took whatever that offense was and made it like 50 times like bigger than what it really was. And so there's been times where, I've had a supervisor maybe talk to me disrespectful. And if I'm more on the depressed side of things, like I would take something like that and, kind of just eat it, kind of just sit with it. But usually when I'm like hypomanic and it's like, especially like really bad, I feel like my bravery is different. So it's like I'm usually a non-confrontational person, but in that state, I'm like, no, like who wants the confrontation? Like I'm ready
Yeah.
for it. I'm gonna say something about it. Like I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're my supervisor. I don't care if I need this job. And yeah, I've gotten into some some pretty serious confrontations with authority. And it's not that I don't respect authority. It's just I don't like a lot of the disrespect from them, and it's very triggering, especially being like in that space or state of mind, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we know it's not our personalities. Literally, it's, scientifically proven that our inhibitions are completely down, right?
Mhm,
Our
mhm,
inhibitions are down. So, and then also there's the grandiosity. So just this feeling, and it's so hard to explain to people that don't live with
mhm,
bipolar disorder and haven't experienced hypomania or mania. Like, it's not like you're thinking, "Oh, I might be right," or you just don't have that capacity to, like, it's like this, I don't know, I can't explain it. There's not a secret voice, but it's like deep within you, this knowing that you are right and that you know best. And it's almost like I have a secret. And the more that they, like, a secret knowing of all
yeah,
things, things that I have no business knowing and no background knowing. And
yeah.
you just, with that combination, so thinking you know everything, and then the combination with the no inhibitions, it's like, yeah, it's just, I feel like the other person, I'm like, "Yeah, but they just don't know." And then I
Yeah.
feel, like, irritated and offended, and I don't know about you, but I get this strong sense of justice when,
Oh, yeah.
so I've stuck, like, got my into some other people's business because I don't like, how they're been treated, and a lot of times this happens to me, not so much anymore, but before. So say there's a grievance and say
Mm,
we're all talking about it, like in the staff room, and then we're noticing. So then I'm like eagle eye watching for that to happen to anybody. And I feel like protective of my people.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
if there's anything, people will be like, yeah, we should talk about it. We should talk with them. We should talk with them. And then I think everybody's going to go. And then
yeah,
I go and no one backs me up and they're all too afraid. So I'm always feeling like I look like this rebel, or sometimes I even, don't do it in an inappropriate way, but just asking questions, and especially when there's rules or things that don't make sense and seem like they're
yeah.
just there for no
The
reason,
safety,
right? Like things that don't make sense. And then, like, the humiliation and, just feeling abandoned by other people. Have you
right.
ever Do you end up being like the spokesperson for
Oh,
injustices?
absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many workplace revolutions I was ready to start. Like, I mean, some of the times it would be over petty stuff, like,
Yeah.
but to me, I'm just like, no, like, I need to tell y'all how wrong y'all are about this. Like, I need to call y'all out. I need to, and kind of going back to what you were saying about like not really being able to explain like why that is. Like, when I think about it, sometimes I feel like the way I would describe it is kind of like almost like how balloons, helium balloons like float, but they have like strings on them that we hold on to. Like, if those balloons were like offenses or things that I would usually take offense to, I feel like when I'm not in that space, like I might grab onto the strings, but they come out of my hands a lot easier. But like when I'm in that space, it's almost like my hands are just made of Velcro. So it's like what once I could just kind of just let go, it's like for whatever reason, I'm like, nah, like I have to hold on to this because it's burning me up
Yeah.
inside. And so, yeah, there's a lot of times where I've kind of taken the stance at work where I start looking at my coworkers a certain way, like y'all are cowards. Like y'all can't
Yes.
go talk to, all right, I got y'all. Then like I'm gonna do it. And then I start pumping myself up. And then, like you said, you look back thinking it's gonna be an army behind you and nobody's there. It's like, yeah,
Nobody. Yeah.
yeah,
Or people tell you your ideas are good and, and then you're the first. I always end up being like the first one to go, which can really be great for when I can harness it for leadership. And I end up in a lot of leadership roles.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, but sometimes not leadership roles I should be in. Okay, this doesn't, I guess it kind of has to do with the job because I got paid, but
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to tell you about a hypomanic one. So,
Okay, yeah,
you
please.
know those calls you get where they do surveys, right?
Hmm.
So I'm so chatty when I'm hypomanic. So they call me and they're asking me like about, because I had went to a restaurant. They were asking me about like the food and like just all my things about what I like about restaurants. And I'm just telling them, right? I'm just blah, 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 blah. We're best friends.
Hmm.
And then they say, well, would you want to be on this like focus group? We can't tell you what restaurant it's for, but just to get some feedback about new products or whatever. And you come to this hotel, there's going to be people there and you're going to get paid $80. And I'm like, I was a student. I'm like, $80 to talk
Yeah,
about things and give my opinion. Are you kidding me? Yes,
yeah.
I
Sign me up
am.
now. Sign me up now.
So I go, you're going to die. So I go and I don't know if I told them or not. I'm vegetarian. Okay.
Okay,
So
okay.
I go. The one of the first things they say is like, well, if you're vegetarian, this might not be for you. We're going to be talking about a new way to do a steak meal, right? Because they were
Uh,
doing big ones. They were trying to promote just small steak at lunch.
yeah, yeah.
Anyways, and I'm totally vegetarian. I don't eat steak. I haven't eaten steak in like 15 years, right? And so, but I'm like, hell no, you are not taking my $80. So I
Yeah,
became the most intense steak connoisseur that ever ate steak.
yeah.
I ended up like leading the crew, like
Mhm.
presenting for my group. I and then I got like an extra because I did that. I got an extra $25 gift card to I think it was like Mr. Mike's or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that. Yeah, and I went home and I told my husband, and he's just like, of course you were able to do that, right?
yeah,
I mean, I could
yeah.
have never done that when I was depressed, but I could just be like, I can turn on, or not even, it just turns on for me, a passion for something
Mhm,
and just feel it so deeply. Have
mhm.
you ever, like when you're hypomanic or, feeling really good about yourself, have you ever got yourself into either jobs or positions or situations where you're like in charge or the boss and you have no business or knowledge about that thing? Please tell me. Tell me.
Yeah, I mean, man, I'm kinda going through the different jobs I've had, like, in my head now. Um, I feel like maybe even if not, like, leadership roles, just certain roles where maybe I didn't feel like prepared. The more like the role went on, I was like, you know what, I probably should not be in this role. But because I presented so well and presented with like conviction of like, because in my mind, I'm like, of course I'm good at this. Like I can do, why not? And presenting myself in that way, in that moment, it's like, yeah, like we have to believe him. Like he believes this with everything in him. But then when it's time to perform, it's kind of like, I don't really know if believe you anymore. And so um I think a job that kind of happened, but I wasn't in the role long enough to see how it played out
Right.
was I got hired. I applied to an agency to be a director for like a group of personal care homes, but they also had like a day program for adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And so I left the job I was at. I went to this job. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm about to be a director of not just a program, but then like within like a 5 mile or 2 mile radius, they had like four different personal care homes. I had never done anything like that up until that point, but I just felt like I could do it, but then when I got into the role, I quickly realized there was so much I was not prepared for. Some of it was on my end of just kind of like overestimating what I could do, but then some of it also was that it was really I don't want to say fault, but I'm gonna just say fault. It was really the company's fault too. They didn't really. It just was a terrible company for lack of better words, and I probably quit. I want to say started this job maybe end of November, beginning of December. I was out the door second week of January. I was
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah. So did you leave a lot of jobs? Did you and my second question would be when you left jobs, would it have been is there a pattern of it being more when you were in a depression or
Mm,
more hypomanic
yeah,
or yeah, tell me
I
about
see what
that.
you're saying. I have had quite a few jobs since I've worked like full time, but it usually would be like me working maybe 1.5 to like 2 years, if that. And then I would just move on to something else. I think a lot of the times what it would be is the depressive episodes initially of like I literally don't have the capacity to go in and deal with not just the people we're serving, but like my coworkers and my supervisors. Like I always had the biggest issues with them, and I just don't have it to give today. And usually they will give some type of response to that. And whatever the response was to that, whenever I would become hypomanic, I would like fixate on like, oh, they don't care about me. Oh, okay, like I see what this is. They don't care about me. They don't like people with mental illness. They don't, and then would just make a like a very split decision without considering
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
It's like I'm just getting out of here. And it would almost feel like I'm paying them back. But in the end, I'm like, dude, like you're really hurting yourself, not necessarily just for leaving, because I'm all for people leaving if it's not, good for your health. But at the same time, I had a whole apartment when I left this job, this director job, and I literally just quit on the spot one day, typed up a
Yeah.
little BS like effective immediately, I'm gone. But
Ah,
I had rent to pay, I had bills, and so I had to end up giving up the apartment, pretty much being evicted. But it felt so right in the moment. But now looking back, it's probably one of the worst decisions from like how am I gonna survive standpoint. But yeah, so it usually starts off the depression, the response to that, and then whatever like the response to a lot of different things. When I'm hypomanic, I fixate on it, I become
yeah.
angry, that
Yeah.
curve I was telling you about, and then I just leave.
Yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
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 How about yourself?
Yeah, I can completely to relate to you about the fixating. I remember because we know with bipolar disorder that even good change, right? Or
Mhm.
even awesome things that are happening can trigger things. And so when I was doing finishing up my PDP, so when I'm a teacher, right? So it's
Okay.
a 5 years, but because I couldn't take 5 courses like the full course load, it took me more like six. But your
Okay.
final year is practicum. So
Yeah.
you're going in the classroom and doing the thing. And then so then near the end, you literally finish your last exam in August, and I had a full-time teaching job for September, right?
Okay.
Never done,
Good.
never like And I was I'm a natural with the teaching. It just comes to me. I'm and I'm not even hypomanic, so I'm not bragging about
Mm.
something I can't do. I can teach.
Right.
But especially when I'm with the littles or whatever, the other stuff, not so great. But
Yeah.
I remember I was like just jacked up, right? Like so pumped. I've worked
Mhm.
6 years to do this. I've got my first
Mm.
contract. I'm going to have my own classroom. I am not sleeping. I
Right.
am making decor for my classroom in the middle of the night. I didn't even own a sewing machine. I sewed little chair covers, 30 little chair covers with corduroy chair covers with little pockets so that they could put their notices and stuff in that. Okay.
Okay.
Do I measure? No. Who the hell has time to measure when you're
Of
hypomanic?
course not.
So they
And
all
you
fit.
know already, so
Yeah,
why mess with
I
it?
know. I'm master seamstress here. And
Yeah.
so none of them were the same size. They all fit. Some I had to jam, some were too big. None of them were the same size.
Okay,
All
okay.
these. So I'm like, I'm just setting the stage here for where I'm at, right?
I
And
get it, I
I'm
get it.
so excited. So we have like our third staff meeting, and it's a private school for kids with learning disabilities. So I'm even more pumped because I'm getting to work with kids that struggled. Like
Yeah,
in my family, there's learning difficulties.
yeah.
ADHD runs rampant in my family, dyslexia as well. And
Mhm.
so I want to help these kids, right? They're like siblings I have. I see them like that. And so we have this the parents give a certain amount of funding, like the board raises it. And so they said make a wish list, right? And so they made it seem like you could get some things on your wish list. So I looked up specific books and programs and field trips, and I put them in order and color coded what would be most important to me.
Mhm.
So then we go to the staff meeting and we have to present them, and there's like teachers and tutors because they got extra help. And
Mhm.
so I present mine. I think it's amazing or whatever. And so they start rating them. So like,
Oh,
and who's going to get what and what, and I had no idea this was going to happen. And I felt so like disrespected, and like they didn't think my ideas were good, and it felt like I was at the bottom. And then I got in my head like, okay, I didn't mean to be like I'm better, but teachers versus tutors, like I have to take your one-on-one, I have to take care of a whole classroom, like
yeah.
surely my things might move up a little bit, right?
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
remember just being like getting infuriated. And it
Yep.
just felt like the people that had been there the longest were like, too bad you're new. That's what I heard. They didn't say
Yeah.
that, but that's what I heard. So after it, I remember going to my classroom and just, I could like feeling rage in my body and just feeling, and I remember it just came. I burst into tears. I was practically in the fetal position on the little carpet in the reading nook in my classroom. And I remember just like heaving, like crying that hard.
Yeah.
And I remember
Yeah.
someone coming in. It was luckily a new person as well, and just kind of taken back, right? Like, holy cow, this is this chirpy, happy person, and they are
Yeah.
losing it. And I'm
Mm.
supposed to start with the kids on the next week. And I am just, yeah. And just with teaching, I would get these ideas in the middle of the night, and I would just, yeah. But the cool thing is, and that's why I think it can be a good job for people with bipolar disorder or bipolar 2 disorder specifically, is a place where you have a lot of autonomy, right?
Mhm.
So in my classroom, it would be okay if I had mood changes because, the kids were really like basically you're just teaching them any skills. So if I was talking about penguins versus whatever, as long as I'm teaching them the study skills
Yeah.
or the writing skills, um,
Yeah.
I could do what I want. So if it was boring or if I didn't feel it, I could switch gears. Or do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? It didn't feel
Yeah.
like I was being
Yeah.
watched, and I knew I was getting the core things with the kids,
Mhm.
but my methods. And that's what I want to come to with you.
Yeah.
I would call myself, and like I've been an event planner, I've done all the things, but
Okay.
I would call the way that I do things organized chaos, and
Yeah.
nobody else would understand. And if you give me a specific, like, if you can't see me, podcast listeners, but I'm like almost like touching my face. I'm like cringing. Like
Mm.
give me a certain spreadsheet that has to be filled out a certain way.
Mm.
So example, like report cards, like it
Yeah.
just like I think outside the box, and I just fitting into that, or doing,
Yeah.
I don't know, doing tasks like if I feel really passionate about doing this part, then the other part would It like
Yeah.
sending this one email seems impossible, and it should be the thing I'm doing first, but I'm doing step 10, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that, your organization skills, or your like, do you notice that when you're hypomanic or depressed? Would someone be able to look at your stuff and be like, oh, yeah, I see the progression in the organization? How does that go?
I mean, if I can be 100, my organization is terrible. Like it is terrible, and that's just something I want to work on. But that kind of like I think it's the bipolar, but I think it's also like some like untreated ADHD maybe too,
Yeah.
or I
Or
could
overlapping. I think
yeah,
it overlaps
exactly,
100%. Yeah.
exactly. And so I think it worked. Like okay, so at one job I'm thinking about, I pretty much was a I was called a basically like a support services coordinator, but it was my responsibility for the day program pretty much whenever clients would have or individuals would have ISP meetings or like their yearly meetings. I was the one that would like interview them to get down to like, okay, what do you feel like your strengths are? What do you trying to get down to like what type of support they need, like what they like person-centered planning pretty much. But what would end up happening because there was like 100 and something clients there, I had to be responsible for like keeping up with all of this documentation if it wasn't electronic. And so I'm laughing because I'm thinking about my office there. Like my desk was very neat, but I had a habit of organization to me meant not, let's take these 100 intakes and like put them in a ring binder. Organization to me was just getting it off the desk. So if you were to look in my drawer of my desk, it's it's a it looked crazy. Like so much paper that shouldn't have been there in there. I mean, pens, literally whatever. I just would throw in there. But to me, that was a lot easier than sitting down to actually figure like, okay, how do I organize this? And so to kind of run from that pain, I know I was signing up for to actually sit and organize. I just would dump everything off the desk into something. And then I would always be paranoid, like whenever I would take these extended leaves of absence away, like they're gonna go to my office and open the
Oh,
desk.
yeah.
They're gonna, they're gonna know, or they're gonna go through my emails and see like that's looking crazy. I always would have this fear of like being found out or doing stuff like that, like when I'm not
Yeah.
there. So yeah, my organization, even now, like, and not actually going to like a 9 to 5, just my personal organization is something that I struggle with. I do well enough to create content, and that's just because I've just built like a certain habit of doing it, but I could be doing so much better even with that if I could really just get organized. But I struggle with that a whole lot.
Same, same. Like my house is totally like neat and tidy, or like an office, but then open drawers. Any drawer, any closet, watch out. Who knows what will fall on
Yeah,
you? And then that gets me into trouble because then um I read about this with students, and I was like completely related to it about how well, the way I think my brain works is I have some executive functioning things. So that's like to do things sequentially, or
yeah,
organizing things. And I'll
mhm,
file things in my brain, and or like this is how my brain works, and or paper in
yeah,
things that don't that are hard to retrieve or don't make
mhm,
total sense of where they are. And or so I'm like that, or bipolar opposite. When I get hypomanic, I'll get this like huge organizational system, right?
okay,
And
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
set it up, and I'll color code, and I'll have the files, and I'll have this, but I keep it up for like less than a couple weeks or a month or whatever. And then I think, oh, I'll do it later. And then it all piles up, and then the system doesn't make sense. And I take more time making it like buying the supplies and the
huh,
organization, or
yeah.
containers. How many freaking
Hmm.
baskets I have?
Oh man, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or agendas. My big thing, I've never found one that works for me. I'll get it, and then I'll color code and have the things. And this was before phones. Phones are easier. But yeah, and I think they're so pretty, like abandoned. I have like the closet of abandoned agendas. Like, I think that I could probably afford like half a
Uh-huh.
car or maybe a scooter in the amount of money that I've
Mhm.
spent on organizational things that I absolutely, in the hypomanic state, think is going to change my life.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I get that. Like I'm thinking about one of the best pieces of news that I could receive at a job when I'm hypomanic is, "Hey, you need any more office supplies?" "Yeah, I do. I do. I need everything because I need the highlighters." I don't even use highlighters like that, but or anything outside of the yellow one, but I need the pink one, I need the blue one, I need the green one, I need the black, I need all of it,
Everything. Yeah. Right.
everything,
I
and
know, I know, and
yeah,
I have a hard time getting rid of stuff too because I think I could probably, and in my defense, sometimes I resurrect that thing. I love being the person that someone needs something and I'm like, "Hold up. 3 years ago, I have the
I
best
got it.
pink highlighter, and then I'm ripping shit apart to find this thing and I've helped someone." And then it
Mhm,
solidifies in my brain why I should not
mhm.
get rid of
Yep,
anything
yep, yep.
ever.
You're kinda like a historian or like like an anthropologist,
A
but,
highlighter
yeah,
historian. Answer that
yeah, we got
up, please.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah, we
do
gotta
want to encourage our people and even encourage you that I always think about that there's the right way, or I use the word normal or most successful way of doing something. Like you mentioned, content creation, like we talk about filing. But my therapist said to me, "Hey, let's take a step back and let's look at how you do things." Okay.
yeah,
And you keep talking about how you're doing them wrong, or you wish you could do this or that, which is always good to reflect, but we are ridiculously hard on ourselves.
yeah, yeah,
But she said, you know, are you creating content? I'm like, oh,
mhm,
well, yeah. Are people responding to your content? Yeah.
yeah,
Are you growing? Yeah. Look at your podcast because I don't like to look at numbers and stuff very much because then I hyperfixate. But she's
yeah,
like, look at this. She's like, so you'd say you're probably like successful, right? And I was like,
yeah,
well, I guess, yeah. And
yeah,
she's like, so maybe we could consider the fact that despite it being organized chaos, it's working for
it
you in some
works.
ways, isn't it?
Yeah,
And I was like, she's like, so maybe you could switch your brain into thinking of the right way and try and use your outside the box ways the best you can, or just not judge them. Because the amount of brain space of thinking that I should be doing something different takes away doing
yeah,
it the way I do it. So I would encourage folks like us that think out the box or creative, um, like try and source out, or maybe you can find a way, um, a way that works for you to do the
mhm,
hard things and not to just get rid of, like, just not do them, but
mhm,
do them your way. And I'm
mhm,
like, what? And then you get like just that different mind shift. And
mhm,
because I've done the thing where it's like, okay, I look at those ones and they say like the posting, like the what is it, like the 5-3-2 method, right? Where it was like 5 personal posts, 2 reposts, and like there's all these social media strategies, right?
yeah.
And so I would try, and then uh, I'd be like, you can't. Then in my head, I'm like, you can't make yourself post about that exact thing that you planned a month ago.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
doesn't work for me. I know
yeah,
what I feel in that day, or
mhm,
I know I can keep a couple rhythms, right? Like I do a manic Monday, I do Wednesday wins and a
yep,
thankful Thursday, and I have those prepared and I do those, right? But
mhm,
besides that, I just go with what
go
I'm
with
feeling.
the flow.
And
Yeah,
I don't plan, like, for example, that's why I love collaborating with you because I'm like, hey, there's this trend, like I'm
yeah,
bipolar, of course, or I
yeah.
live with bipolar, of course and you're like, yeah, I'm in, and we just come up with it and do it.
Yeah, it's like that's like honestly one of the magical pieces about creativity, and I see it a lot like as an artist, like as a musician, where it's like some of my best songs, looking back on it, was stuff that I didn't like overthink. But the only reason I was overthinking it was because I was trying to make it perfect. And so, like in the context of this, I feel like a lot of the times when we make these comparisons about I'm not doing this like the right way. It's like we're kind of comparing it to a flawed standard. You
Yes.
know what I mean? Where it's like, if you really knew about this person who gave you this standard, or maybe even what they struggle with too, like it's really not a right or wrong. It's just about like what works for you. But I feel like in the context of like work and employment, a lot of the times there isn't really like that flexibility because it's like it's very much like, at least in my experience with going into a lot of jobs, where it's like there's this strict like boundaries with like company culture and
Yeah.
productivity, and it's like if you don't really fall in the kind of like in line with that, then you don't really serve a place to them, like or a purpose for them, or you're really looked at as more like a threat to the company. But it's like, no, it's just I don't work like this. But it's not that I don't want to do the job, but I just would like to do it like the way that I would like to do it. And it's hard finding, to me, places that will be open to that. But I think
Yeah.
sometimes too is, looking back, when I've wanted that from jobs, I feel like I would be very upset like with the company. But then also looking back now, it's like I probably maybe could have taken some more time to explain, like, look, this is how I work. Like, this is what I'm good at. This is my strong points. I'm not the closer on the sales because I have a lot of social anxiety, but I'm a good strategist though,
Mhm.
because I just am kind of like a loner in a sense sometimes. But like when I am alone, I'm able to think of like great ideas. So kind of getting out of this thing of like, just because I can't do it like them or the way they want me to, it doesn't mean I can't do it. It's just it may look different, but I'm still a valuable player on this team, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And wouldn't businesses flourish or be able to use people so much better than trying to stick them in a box? Like, for example, like, and y'all, if you want to support us, like if Brandon and I can figure, well, just the content creation is our thing, but help us make like the money to be able to do the content creation or the podcast. And I know all the things to monetize, but then when I think about it, I'm like, "Oh, I'll just record another podcast because that's what I like doing." Right. I
Yeah.
feel, and I love the freedom of doing the podcast and being in charge of my podcast and my, my Instagram and such,
Mm.
because I can work the way I work, like you said. So if I'm like 9 to 5 or whatever, and I was at an office job or something, it like maybe 5 of those hours I look like I'm doing nothing, but then I get my idea and I get 5 hours of work done in 3 hours. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And so you'll still get the same out of me, just differently. And wouldn't it be like, I just think that big companies, like, they're just missing out in
Yeah.
um tapping into, neuroatypical folks,
Yeah.
right?
I
Just
think so too. Yeah.
yeah.
But that's
Yeah,
why I think like it's so, not to put like pressure on ourselves or anybody listening, because just living with what we live with is enough. So like I know adding this layer of putting like some responsibility on us to like keep educating, but I would even say just learning, because I've learned a lot even over this last year by talking to so many people like and online, where I'm like I'm seeing a lot of patterns with people that would be considered like neurodivergent, where it's like there's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of like unique problem solving, but it's like if I didn't really know that about myself or like just our community in general, like me going to my supervisor to like explain the type of support I need or like how I can still function as like an employee would probably be different, because I don't really know, or I don't feel like super confident that okay, this thing that y'all may view as like a flaw, I know that a lot of us deal with this and it actually can be something we can leverage to,
yeah.
to use for good. But I totally get what you're saying as far as what it would look like. Let me tell you, I used to be in my office with the door closed, recording content at work, but it's because I knew I have this that needs to be done by the end of the day. I'll waste these 3, 4 hours doing what you always consider nothing, but I know that by the time like 1 o'clock comes around, it's down to
Go
business, and
time.
yeah. But if you were to come in between 9 and 12, I might be. I can say this now because I'm not with this job anymore, but I'm talking standing on the desk.
Yeah.
Like if they would have walked in and seen me, it was
Yeah.
it was wild, man.
Yeah, like we need different things like movement.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love what you said there because it brought up something really important. And I think what I think we need to think extra hard about the things that we're good at, that not just we're good at thinking when you're hypomanic, but I try and think of what is something, and this is how I set up the podcast, what is something like that I'm good at and I know I can do. That always isn't good enough. The knowing I can
Mhm.
do it, it's knowing
Mhm.
that I can do it consistently and
Yeah.
knowing that I can keep showing up, because I set up
Mhm.
these things that are too hard or these expectations that are too high, and then I can't live up to it and I quit or I implode, right?
Yeah.
But where I could set up, and that's why this podcast isn't every week. And I
Mhm.
don't say I drop it on Mondays. I may drop it on Saturday at 9 p.m. or Monday morning at 8. It depends with my schedule.
Yeah.
I know that, like, I know things about myself now. So I think we need to be extra careful of writing down, like you said, so our strengths, but also write down how can we be most successful at work?
Mhm.
And hopefully we
Mhm.
can share, or we're in an environment that is open
Mhm.
to that. But I think, like, as a boss, I would appreciate that. And I've had people like do a little bit of work for me on the podcast, and I've
Mhm.
been an event planning lead. So had people
Yeah.
under me, and
Mhm.
some of the best work I got out of people, where I was like, what are you passionate about? What part of this job
Mm.
do you love and you're good at? What are you not? And I'm going to put you in that zone.
Yeah.
You get
Yep.
people working in their zones, right? But if
Mhm.
you have that, and I'm talking not just in the back of your mind, but have it written down.
Mhm.
Also, have your patterns written down so that you
Mhm.
can put things into place for
Mhm.
when that comes,
Yeah.
right? Save
Mhm.
your sick days if you can, right? Like,
Mhm.
or have things in place that that you can do, make sure. And then I have lists also,
Mhm.
things that don't help, because I gravitate towards them because they come naturally, right? Like the staying up late,
Yep.
doing those. I have two lists because I know all these and they seem hard, but I tell
Mhm.
myself, what are the most harmful things you could do to make things worse? So
Yeah.
I think having those lists, watching your patterns, and
Mhm.
not trying to stuff yourself in to a box, because we have to admit, it's not our weaknesses, it's our illness, but we have it. It's chronic. It's not going away. We have to learn how to live with it. And if you need to say you're someone that cannot work, you cannot work. Your number one priority is literally staying alive.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Dot dot dot. There is going to be a part two. Brandon and I had such an amazing conversation and we lost track of time. It was like sitting on a couch together, just chatting about all the things that we've experienced living with bipolar and being a part of the workforce from the very beginning until now. And so I didn't want you to miss the rest of it and feel overwhelmed with the length of it. So we have part two that will come out next week. And I really hope that you tune in for that too. We are also going to make another follow-up episode because we want to share all of your responses, and we're going to ask for even more stories so that we can do an entire episode dedicated to our community and their experiences. We didn't realize how much we needed to be able to talk to someone that understood, and maybe you do too. So watch for that on our Instagrams. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this episode, and we hope that you will join us on the next one. The best way to do that is to hit the follow button or the like button on wherever you listen to your podcasts, or subscribe on YouTube, and then you'll never miss an episode. And that helps us too, because it'll help us get this episode and other episodes out to those who need it most. Thanks again for tuning in. You can find video versions of This is Bipolar on our YouTube channel. We also have all our previous and soon-to-be future episodes of the podcast on Apple, Podbean, Spotify, and Google Play. We spend most of our time on Instagram at this.is.bipolar. There is a vibrant community there where we have conversations and post different ideas and different strategies, and we'd just love for you to join us there. It is so helpful if you enjoy our work or think it would be helpful to someone if you could like and share and save and follow us in all or any of those spaces. If you're a listener for the podcast, if you could leave a review, we would be forever grateful. Again, thank you for being here with us. Let's get the word out. Let's share lived experiences so that we can change the ideas that people have about bipolar and help those of us that live with it feel less alone. This is Bipolar.